Hi, Misha here, and got into looking at the U.S. Air Force's Century series with the F-100 Super Sabre, which was the Air Force's first supersonic jet fighter. Now we're going to look at the F-101 Voodoo, which honestly had a lot of roles and a very long history that took over a decade. And this is the 101B variant. Before we get to that, we need to talk about where this began. And this dates back to the end of World War II. And in 1946, the Air Force put out a tender. It wanted a new, as it called it, penetration fighter that could escort and fly with its next generation of bombers. It had the B-29, but it was looking forward to new jet-powered, high-speed, high-altitude, long-range bombers. And it needed a fighter to go with them, just like the P-51 Mustang had done before. So the following year, it gave the go-ahead and some funds to the McDonald Aircraft Company to make 2 prototypes, and they came up with the first XF-88 Voodoo. It did pretty well, but by 1950, the Air Force had felt its needs had changed. After all, it was getting into different bombers. And of course, Russia was now nuclear capable. So it canceled the program. But then Korea began. And of course, bombers were used in Korea, and by 51 the Air Force reversed this decision, saying, hold up here, maybe we do need something to escort our new bombers. And so they started the program back up and took submissions. Again, McDonald submitted the XF-101 Voodoo prototype, but a bigger, more enhanced, higher performance version. And this is, of course, what won the competition, and late that year was redesignated as the F-101. However, yet again, the Air Force changed its mind what it wanted this plane to do. Now it wanted it to be able to escort bombers and also be a nuclear capable, a nuclear armed strategic interceptor, or fighter if you wish. Basically, they wanted to be able to carry nukes. So an initial small production was put forward. They ordered about 24 planes. They weren't really going to go with the whole build 1 or 2 prototypes. They just wanted to do a small production batch and use that for testing and evaluation. So that went underway. Well, by 53, early 54, the Korean War was over. So again, the Air Force's needs changed, and its new B-52 was just coming online. And they really felt, now this time our bomber doesn't really need an escort. And to some extent they were right. But the project was already well underway. By 54, September, the first plane, call it pre-production I guess, took a test flight and didn't do so great. Mostly its speed. It could not even cross the sound barrier. It hit up to about 0.9, even 0.99 Mach, but it really couldn't go supersonic, making it a transonic at best. Other issues were uncovered So they kind of went back to the drawing board a bit, revamped it, and came back with the F-101A, which had its first flight in '56. It did better, and Air Force placed another order, and the first 101As, nuclear-capable strategic interceptors or fighters, whatever you want to call them, started to go into service in '57. And really didn't do a whole lot. Only 77 101As with nuclear capability were produced. They could mount regular standard missiles, rockets, bombs, but they never were equipped so for combat or deployment. There was also an upgraded version, a strengthened version known as the F-101C. But really the most important version here is the RF-101, which was the reconnaissance variant of this plane. It overflew Cuba in 1962 at a very critical time. Also, it was used by Taiwan to basically spy on China. And the RF-101 was sent over to Vietnam in '64 and was used for a few years until being replaced by the RF-4, and really was the only variant of the Voodoo to see true combat. Well, what about this one here, the 101B? It's a bit of its own story. While the 101A was a single-seat variant for the Strategic Air Command, the 101B was a two-seat variant for the Tactical Air Command. And for this story, we have to go back to 1954. The Ultimate Interceptor project of 1954, so named because they expected the plane to be in service by that time, was taking way too long. It would eventually lead to the F-102 Delta Dagger and F-106 Delta Dart, but in the interim they looked at the recently developed McDonald F-101 Voodoo. And in 1954, the Tactical Air Command reworked this design to be more of a interceptor, a high-performance interceptor. It could still carry nuclear weapons, but would be fitted out with 4 AIM Falcon missiles to shoot down enemy bombers or aircraft. So the 101B went into service in 1959 and would be made in the largest numbers. They would make nearly 500 of the 101Bs. Now these would all be used by America, with Canada the only foreign user. So what do we have here? Well, the nickname for the RF-101 in Vietnam was Longbird, and that's apt. This thing is nearly 68 feet long and has a nearly 40-foot wingspan. But if you look, it's kind of spindly. We've got a very high tail. We have 2 engines, something that McDonald was a big proponent of for redundancy. Even though initial tests for the 101 couldn't quite hit supersonic, after revisions and updates, This ended up being a pretty damn fast plane for its day and time. It could get up to Mach 1.7, maybe even close to 1.75. It also had a very high ceiling. It could get up to nearly 58,500 feet. Very high for that day and time. It's a very clean design. Again, our M missiles are in this pallet under the nose that rotates. It has 2 missiles per side, and on the nuclear version it would have 1 Genie rocket per side. So they would fire off one side, then rotate and fire off the other. This was done for space and reduce drag. The only real external attachment options were drop tanks. They could be fitted with 2 drop tanks for range. As I said, this is a 2-seat version with a pilot and a systems weapons officer, basically to handle all the other duties of the new advanced radar because it's an interceptor. We'll see the same thing with McDonnell and McDonnell Douglas's later F-4 Phantom. In fact, if you look at the tail and the engines especially, even a bit of the wings, you can see that design influence of the Phantom. No questions about it. In the end, though, the Voodoo was always kind of an interim step. It was the Strategic Air Command really couldn't decide what they wanted to do with it. They never would completely give up on it, but they kept changing its roles. As a reconnaissance bird, it was kind of pressed into service. It was never really designed to be a recon plane, although it did very well at it because of its altitude and speed. In fact, it was quite well liked in Vietnam. And of course, the Tactical Air Command, it was always an interim solution, a stopgap measure until they could figure out the whole Convair situation, which really they didn't do until the 106 in the 1960s. In the end, about 800 Voodoos were made, including all variants, pre-productions, everything, and again, most were this B style here. The A was phased out of service in the Air Force by 1966, and the B by 1972, and most of the RFs were phased out by 1970. The Air Guard would continue to fly the Voodoo for a while, a bit longer, but by 82 they too had retired all of their planes. Production would end in 1961, so pretty early on. By that point, the F-4 was already well underway and in development and about to hit the scene. But considering that people couldn't make up their mind what this was supposed to be, it did a job pretty well. And it did at least 3 very distinctive jobs for 3 different agencies. So that's kind of neat. This plane, this model itself is neat for being kind of a prototypical Phantom, an F-4. It does convey that light spindliness. And of course the fuselage and everything is metal, but it's very thin and streamlined, again, to try to get best performance out of the airframe. The tail is plastic. Canopy's open. The weapons bay does rotate. One side is empty. The other side has the Falcon missiles you can show. And as you saw, it does come with drop tanks. Comes with 2 pilots. Comes with landing gear. Is it my favorite out of these? No, but it's a neat one. And a unique plane. And I'm glad they do make it. These are getting a little hard to find now. They're starting to sell out. You can still probably find one new, but If you're interested in one, you might look sooner than later. And that's about it. The 101 Voodoo, kind of a stepping stone on the way to the Phantom. Anyway, any questions or comments? As always, welcome them below. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And definitely check out other videos when you get time. That'd be great. Also, how do you like my kind of ghetto turntable? I had to stick some kind of cloth down on it to keep things from sliding, but now it stays on real good. Doesn't want to slip off at all. So, seems like it's working. Hopefully it's giving you a little more visual. Definitely makes it easier on me to operate one-handed. Alrighty guys, I appreciate it, and I'll be back very soon. Catch you then.